Hi, I'm Terry Thayer, certified book coach, certified focusing professional, and part of Dear Book Coach.
Hi, I'm Carrie Savage. I'm a writer and certified book coach, and number two in the in the lineup of three of Dear Book Coach.
Today, you're number two.
Today, yes, not a ranking order. It's just a
Yeah.
thing.
And I'm Stephanie Detlefs, rounding out the group. I'm a writer and certified book coach.
So, this is a friendly advice space for you as you plan, draft, and revise your novel. In each video, we answer a question submitted by a writer like you from 3 points of view. You get to pick the advice that works for you. Today's question comes from Robin. Robin says, Dear Book Coach, I've been told my scenes are moving too fast. How do I fix that? Carrie, you're up first.
Well, I have been accused of this myself. I probably shouldn't say accused because when I've gone back and looked at them, I have agreed that I do tend to fly through things. I think that that's probably fairly common, especially in earlier drafts where we as writers are just working things out on the page. We're kind of just doing the brain dump a little bit. So I know the way I tend to write, like I see things in my head, it's sort of cinematic in a way. And so I'm translating that very quickly. And then when I go back and reread it or have someone give me feedback on it, it's like, no, you need to slow down and kind of linger here because there's a lot going on. And I just feel like you just right past it. So some of the techniques that I have learned to employ in order to slow down my scenes are just as from a big picture perspective, think about the details. And this can mean a lot of different things. And I know we're all going to sort of touch on probably some of the same things. But the first thing is sensory details. So employ all of those five senses. What are your characters seeing, hearing, feeling, touching? And don't forget about taste and smell. That was a piece of advice that I got a while back from the wonderful Marjan Kamali, who wrote The Stationery Shop and Together Tea. And I have also noticed that when I include those kinds of sensory details, especially taste and smell, that really seems to resonate with people. They notice it, but in a good way, and say, oh, I really loved that moment when, you told me that she tasted the dirt in her mouth, or, she was smelling the hay in the air, or something like that. Another thing that you can think about as you're going back or as you're writing first time is think about setting. What kind of space are your characters moving through and how are they interacting with it? I tend to think about someone who was in one of my writing classes who wrote thriller type, in the thriller genre. His scenes tended to be very dialogue heavy, and as appropriate for the genre, the pacing was super fast. It was just bing, 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 bing. But even he needed to slow it down a little bit. And one of the things that we sort of hooked onto for him that was really helpful was to think about how your characters, as they're having their discussion, how are they moving through the space? First of all, where are they? Are they on the porch? Are they in a bedroom? Are they out at a restaurant? What's happening around them and how are they moving through that space? How are they interacting with it? And lastly, I would say think about your character's interiority. What are people thinking that they're not saying to each other? And this, of course, is going to look a little bit different if you're employing, depending on the point of view that you're employing, whether it's first or close third or omniscient. But the advice always applies. It's just might be applied a little bit differently as to how close or far you're in people's heads and whose heads you have access to, of course, depending on what that point of view is. But think about how your characters are reacting to each other. How can you use gesture or movement to convey or complement what your characters are saying? Or how do their movements give away whether they're being honest or not? Do their movements differ from what it is that they're saying? And so that's a cue to you or maybe the person that they're in the conversation with doesn't notice, but you as the reader will then pick up like, oh, wait a minute, whether that person is intentionally being dishonest or we're just supposed to realize that they're being dishonest. Those kinds of little hints can say a lot and also make your readers feel very smart. So those are some things to think about. I, like I said, especially would keep all those considerations in mind when you're going back and revising. I think it's easier to sort of break that down and see where you can add some of this judiciously. You don't have to go overboard with any of it. Add it in as you're working through your revisions. So Stephanie, what would you say?
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. And in fact, I was going to say some of those same things. So that's awesome. In my experience, there are usually one of two things, or sometimes both things, that are happening here, possibly. One is that you're relying on dialogue to tell the story. That happens a lot. That makes dialogue if you think about reading a page of like prose where there's paragraphs versus a page of dialogue, the page of dialogue reads a lot faster. And while the same amount of time might be passing on each, the dialogue doesn't give the same sense of story, although it's important, of course, but it doesn't give the same context as adding in some of those other details as well. So check that you're not just relying on dialogue too much to tell the story. Also, going along with what Carrie was just saying, the other thing that usually is happening is that you're explaining what's happening more than you're giving the audience a chance to experience it themselves. So if I tell you the cat ran across the road, that's a very different thing than if I give you the sensory experience of watching the cat run across the road, right? So that goes with what Carrie was just saying, but I'm telling you that because then there's two specific things that you can look for in your text. Are there places where there's just extensive dialogue? Perhaps that's a spot to highlight and go back and see if you can add some detail. Also look for places where you're just telling the audience that something's happening. A little bit of that is fine, but you don't want to just do that. And we actually have already done an episode of Dear Book Coach about showing versus telling. So I would recommend you go back because we gave some great suggestions there too. I will give you a personal story here. I just chatted with my own book coach a couple of days ago, and I'm doing a ton of explaining in my first draft. And she's like, "You're just explaining. Why don't you show us? You're just explaining. Why don't you show us?" And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know what to do," because I know what it means, but putting it on the page is a very different thing, because like Carrie said, you have it so clearly in your head that just saying the cat ran across the road is a beautiful picture in your mind, but it's challenging to put that into words on the page and to remember to do that. So what she suggested that I do is actually try she said, if this is too weird, you can just imagine that you're standing next to the character. But she said what she likes to do, and what I actually am now going to practice every time I sit down to write one of my 3 points of view, is to actually imagine myself embodying that character so that I can be in her, in this case, they're all girls, but this in her body and experience what she's experiencing, not just through her eyes, but through her skin, through her feet, through everything, and just be in that space. So if that's too woo-woo for you, try just standing next to your character in a scene. Just close your eyes for a couple of minutes and imagine that. And it might help you add those details in. Just remember that the most important thing is that you want to give the reader an experience of what's happening in the story, not just throw information at them. Those are two very different things. And reading a novel, the reason we read novels is to experience the story for ourselves. And a reader is not going to want to just be told what's happening. She or he or they are just going to want to be in the story as well. So, Terry, how about you?
Yeah, what comes to mind as you're saying that is you're trying to create an immersive environment, right?
Yeah.
You really want your reader to sink into that. And so it is about slowing down. Now, this is very draft specific, because if you write your first draft and all your scenes are really fast, that's fine. That may be the way you need to get the plot out of your head. And, and we've talked about that. But Sometimes it's a little hard to corral our enthusiasm about our story, to slow down and fill in the scenes with the kind of detail people love to read. This is an exercise from my art class that I took, which was really eye-opening. This way of immersing yourself in detail. You can't really do that unless you are out in the world seeing things a little differently than everybody else. If you're a writer, it's not the detail of that everyone notices. You want that extra thing. You want that. My neighbor just told me that dandelions have another little seed pod that's kind of hidden that she noticed when she was pulling weeds, something I don't do. So I didn't know this, and it adds that level of detail. So you want to practice immersing yourself in your world, whatever it is. And the outside world is a great place to start unless you're writing a closed box mystery, then you immerse yourself in that world. But in art class, we had to stand in the same place for 25 minutes. We did it indoors and outdoors, and take 25 pictures. Now, your first instinct is take like a ton of pictures, and we were only allowed to take 25, and we had to stand there for 25 minutes. And it was a long time. But, the world kind of unfolds as you stand there, and you start to see the different color greens that were in the bush, or the way the light was playing on the I stood by a creek because I wanted something to be happening. But, practice just when you go outside, when you're in your house, try noticing just another level. Try to train yourself to see beyond what's right in front of you. And this does go back to the showing, not telling video that we did, and these specific details that are important. Is your protagonist using paper plates? Well, why? It's not a throwaway, nothing's a throwaway thing. So you can look at that again if you want to hear more about how details really matter in showing what's going on. So since it's not too woo for me, I would like to suggest we do a little bit of a focusing exercise on how to get with our characters and in that world. And so I just ask you to settle into your chair, perhaps noticing your breathing, not trying to change anything, just seeing how you are in your space right now. This is one of those things you can come back to at any time, perhaps every time you sit down to write. Finding your feet, really grounding down, feeling that I like to feel the earth, the gravity, the connection between me and my other book coaches. We're all over the country, United States. And then just coming inside and picturing perhaps the protagonist you're writing about, or whatever character it is you're writing about. Maybe, like Stephanie said, you can be in that person's body and actually looking through their eyes and see what they see. We don't, in our own space, notice something unless it means something to us. We could be looking at the same, I don't know about you, but I could put up a little saying that I might want to remember. I don't look at, after a while, I don't see it. So whatever your protagonist or your character's eyes are landing on needs to be something specific to that moment in the story. So just thinking about where you are in your story, where your character is, not just physically where they are, but what headspace they're in, what part of the story they're in. And allowing yourself to just be there. Or if it's too much to be in with that person, be next to them, as Stephanie said. And just giving yourself some time to settle into your character, remembering what's been going on with him or her, remembering what you want to happen to her. And let the details come into play. And let yourself slow down and see where the character is going, and see if you can't get a better feel for what they're going through. And try that each time you sit down to write, or when you're writing a particular difficult scene, just letting yourself be the character for however long. If you're Carrie and you have a pirate, sometimes that involves having a sword and jumping around the room. But yeah, so try that. And that's all from me.
Yeah. Oh, now I feel like, again, as always, when we do these focusing exercises, I just want to sit down and write afterwards, because I do get into a little bit of a different headspace. It's awesome. But I think what I've heard sort of a common thing in everything that we've all said is just that being grounded and focused in your character in the moment is going to bring a lot of this detail. It's going to help you slow it down, and bring all of this stuff that you may have missed the first time around because you're just getting the words on the page, which again is totally fine and normal. And I think we all do that to some extent. So yeah, I think that is it for today. We hope you found an answer that made sense to you at this point in your life and at this point in your book. Remember that you can submit your question anytime at dearbookcoach.com, and we will see you next time.
Bye.